So you might have already learned about different module of F5 in LTM. Okay, so in F5 we have different types of modules. One is the LTM, that is a local traffic manager. Other is a GTM, which is nowadays known as a DNS. This is a global traffic manager, which is managing the DNS request. Other we have ASM, AFM, APM. So these are the different modules. Okay, so here we are going to cover DNS module, and I would let you know the why F5 is required to manage the DNS services. However, that is managed by the any other DNS server, but why F5 is required? So we'll understand that. Okay, so let's see. Let me just talk about the course, and after that we will see that why DNS is required. So in this course, we are going to cover basic things. For example, basic to advanced we are going to cover. So we will talk about what is the DNS, and we will see that how DNS is being deployed in any organization. Then we will talk about big IP DNS services. We'll discuss about global server load balancing. This is one of the mechanisms to manage the traffic, global traffic. And then we'll discuss about data center and server object, what all the objects we have on the F5. We'll see the DNS virtual server, DNS pool, wide IP, etc. So these are the major things that we are going to cover.
Okay.
Now moving to next, which is why DNS is required. Okay, and we will focus. Our focus is more around the DNS services because we are going to learn F5 DNS module. So we'll understand what is DNS server and why it is required. Okay. So if I say that have you visited any website last few days with any IP, with the using of IP? Last few days, I mean 3 or 4 days.
No, I only use .com IP URL .com.
not IP. Okay.
Yeah, not IP.
Why you are not using? Because it's difficult to remember, right?
Yeah, remember, and it's not familiar on .com like URLs are very familiar and easily rememberable.
Name is more familiar and not IP, right? So
yes.
that's why we are using IP addresses. I mean name, not an IP addresses. So yes, the answer is if you not visited any website with that name, okay, that's great. Then we have to learn this DNS services, F5 DNS services. Now, if we talk about the domain name system, what it does basically, this is a hierarchical design and decentralized naming system. Okay, so this is kind of naming system. Okay, which is this naming system is stored on DNS server. So whenever any PC is requesting for any website name, okay, by default PC required IP to communicate. This is doing IP to IP communication, but for a user, this is not easy to remember the IP, and that's why there is a user-friendly name has been created. So whenever any user is visiting any particular website using website name, so the query first go to the DNS server so that it can resolve the IP, and once IP gets resolved, the PC would be direct approaching to IP, and then it would be able to access particular website or particular URL. And that's what DNS does basically here. A DNS maps name into the IP. Okay. So whenever you are browsing for any name, it would provide the IP, and you can access that particular system via IP. So this is the decentralized. That means this is not, the DNS server is not in any central location. This is a distributed. It can be in on premises. It can be on the root level, or it can be on top level domain. So this is decentralized. But the main work of the DNS is to resolve name into the IP. And the reason is the user is more familiar with the name, okay, but not with the IP. So that's why DNS service came into the picture. Now, if I talk about name resolution, how name resolution is happening, so you can take the example of this. Okay, overall there are 10 steps happening for any name resolution. Let's say this system is trying to browse www.beta.example.com. So its query first check on its local system. Actually, there is a local system that is a host file. You might have heard about that host file. First of all, his query gets checked on the host file, whether on host file against this beta.example.com is there any entry or not. If there is any entry, it would get the IP. If not, then it would check on the local DNS server over here. So maybe local DNS server you would see in the organization that there is a local DNS server. So it would check the local DNS server that it would check like, do you know what is the beta.example.com? What is the IP of beta.example.com? If DNS server, local DNS server knows that, then fine, it is going to reply. But if doesn't know, this doesn't know, so it would send that query to root server, which is dot actually. This is dot. This is a root server. So his query would go to the root server over here, and it would the query would go to root server and it would ask that, hey server, do you know what is beta.example.com? Then root server is going to reply, I don't know, but I can try to ask .com. .com is nothing but this is a top level domain. So it would try to ask to .com. Okay. So .com could be authoritative server to reply this. So he's now the query back to this, and then the local DNS server sending that query to .com. That do you know what is the beta.example.com? So it would say, I don't know what is the IP of beta.example.com, but I can try to ask entire things. Okay. And then this would go to, this would ask you, I mean, it would try to ask that the query is going to example.com over here. So it would give the IP of example.com, give the reference that you can ask this to example.com. So now query would go to the example.com over here. Then this is going to generate the query to the example.com for answers. And then this is going to give the reply that I don't know. I mean, it would give the reply that this is the this is the better server that we that would have asked the I can say that would reply the exact query. So now what would happen? Now this DNS server is sending that query to beta.example.com, and then beta.com example.com is going to reply with the IP to this local DNS server. Local DNS server would create the cache on this, okay, for that reply, and would reply to this system as well. So system would get the IP of that beta.example.com, and wherever it is located on the internet, okay, it is going to reach over there directly. So let's say beta.com example.com is here. Is here, which got the IP 200.0.0.5, something this IP. So what would happen? Now traffic would go to this, I mean, this beta.example.com, whatever the DNS server is, it is going to reply with this IP to this IP, and then host would directly try to access this public IP. So this is overall the query work. Okay, this is overall the DNS work. So if I talk about in DNS resolution, so how DNS resolution is happening in first step, my system would try to check on the local host entry. If the local host entry is not there, it would try to get the DNS name from local DNS server. If the local DNS server is not able to resolve, so query would go to root. Root would be giving the reference to top level domain .com, .net, .org, like that. Since this is .com website, so it would go to top level domain .com website, and then .com is giving the reference to actual website, which is example.com. And if the example.com there is subdomain, okay, so it would be sending to that subdomain, and then subdomain is going to reply actual IP, and when system get actual IP, it would be able to reach there. So this is overall query.
Like how can we find the so all these traffic flows or the communication is happening between the local DNS server and the other root and top level DNS server,
Right.
not with the client.
Not with the client, because on client, what is we have configured DNS, right? So if client doesn't know that, then this local DNS server is going to create the query against you.
Okay. And how do we know like what is our local DNS server from? Like is it Google 8.8.8 or something else?
It would be configured on system itself, right? So on the system where you configure the IP, it would
Okay.
get the DNS, local DNS server, maybe local DNS server or maybe any public DNS server. Okay.
Okay.
So like public DNS server is 8.8.8. So it may go to there as well. Yeah. So this is the entire query is happening. Now we will talk about that how you can manage the DNS in your premises. So I'm writing over here. Basically, what is happening in our premises? Let's say I have a company, any organization. You can take example of Wipro company. Okay, so Wipro is one of the organization which has the users over here. These are the users in Wipro, and they want to access any particular website. Okay, so what can be done? You can create any internal DNS over here, which is on-prem. So when any user is accessing any website of wipro.com, so all the query would send to this local DNS. So this is, we can say this is on-prem DNS server. Okay, this is on-prem DNS server, and this on-prem DNS server is keeping the record or resolving the query, whether that is internal or that is external. I would talk about the external as well. So if this system want to access internet, okay, this local system, they would send the request to local DNS server, and they can this local DNS server is going to resolve their query for any website that they are trying to access. So if this one have the we can say if this server has a record, this server is going to reply. If not, then it would forwarding that query to any ISP or maybe root server over there. But what if you have hosted some server in the wipro.com itself? There are some server is hosted, and now people is trying to access these websites. So let's say this server is resolving wipro.com. This server is what? This server is email.wipro.com. This server may be consulting.wipro.com. Okay, like that. And now, not this time, your internal user is accessing. So against those internal user, you have made entry on the on-premises over here, that this is the IP of consulting.wipro.com, email.wipro.com. But what if the external user is accessing? There could be one external user, okay, which may try to access wipro.com. Okay, so let's say what they required, if the external user want to access wipro.com, so what they required IP, right? They need to get the IP. How they would get the IP? Okay, so let's say they reach to .com root server, and root server has given the example that if you just want to access this wipro.com, so you can ask the IP of wipro.com to this DNS server. Okay, so root server has given the reference that if you just want to access the wipro.com, so it's better you can do the query to this DNS server. Okay, now what would happen when this is going to generate the query for this on-premises DNS server? Okay, so on-premises DNS server is going to give one public IP. Let's say this wipro.com got IP 200.0.0.50. This, so the DNS server is going to reply that if you are accessing the wipro.com, you can just try to access through this IP. Okay, so now this user would get IP, and this user is directly trying to reach to your on-premises web server, which is wipro.com. Okay, so can you imagine that when Wipro is publishing their website over the internet and making DNS entry on their local DNS server, how much DNS query can be generated? Because this wipro.com is one of the famous company, Wipro, and it's the main website. So maybe thousands or million of the requests is coming to this DNS server to resolve the IP of wipro.com. Okay, maybe this DNS server is getting thousands of requests or millions of requests for IP resolution. Okay, because internal user or external user both are trying to access wipro.com. Okay, in that case, this system would be very robust if you are using on-premises DNS server. So this system should be very robust, who could reply to the system who is making the query. So this system should be very robust, okay, on premises. And you know, basically you are hosting DNS server on Linux machines, okay, Linux machine or Windows machine. So maybe this system is a Linux or Windows machine. So you have to make sure that this server should be very secure, okay, for handling different types of attack as well. Okay, so if you just want all these things, so what you need to do, you need to maintain good infrastructure for DNS handling, and other way you have to require a good engineer who can manage these DNS server and it's a security. Okay, so there are more administrative work is required, and for a small organization, I have taken example of wipro.com, but let's say I just want to start uninets.com. Sorry, UniNets is my website. Okay, and you know that this UniNets is being browsed by different people. Okay, and maybe we have this kind of hits. Let's say 100 hits per minute. We have 100 hits per minute for uninets.com. Okay, on that cases, is it worth to maintain on-premises DNS server? Purchase heavy infrastructure on-premises infrastructure. It is worthy.
No, for a smaller number of requests, no.
For a small number of requests, it's not worthy.
Yeah.
So there is another type of deployment that can be done on the on-premise, I mean, on the cloud provider or DNS service provider. So uninets.com, I just want to create a DNS entry for uninets.com. So definitely I would not try to host a DNS server on our on-premises. That would resolve a public IP. So what I would do, I would use a cloud-based DNS server. So I can say this is a cloud-based DNS server, where I can purchase this service from any cloud-based DNS service provider. So you might know this 123 domain. This is one of the company which is providing cloud-based DNS services. Okay, so this is 123 domain, or There are many. Okay, 123 domains are really very famous. Let me show you. I think website has been changed. So this is domain and brand management. So they provide DNS services actually. So using them, then you can manage your domain. Okay. So basically, what is happening? For example, I'll tell you. So I would tell over here what is happening basically. UniNets.com. Let's say I just want to host this UniNets.com. What I need to do? First, I would purchase a domain. Domain purchasing. Post domain purchasing, I would host that. I would do the hosting where I would store the whole web page. And after that, I would do the DNS entry. So these three things I need to do. What? First domain purchasing, then hosting, and then DNS entry. These three things I need to do. And since we are very small company, uninets.com, okay. So maybe domain after domain purchasing, hosting, we may do on premises or we may do on cloud, any third party domain hosting provided. So maybe we can use on-prem for hosting or any third party we can use for DNS entry as well. Either we can use on-prem DNS or maybe I can use third party. Okay, so let's say I purchase a domain. After that, I did created a web server. This web server is web server. This web server got the public IP, okay, which is, let's say, any public IP. Let's say 122.2.1.5. This is the public IP of this web server. And on this web server, this is running the application, which web application, which is representing you. So what we need to do, whatever the DNS service provider, we need to make the entry there on their DNS server. Okay, we need to create one zone, and on that zone we need to tell that uninets.com having this IP 122.2.1.5. This is the IP of, let's say, uninets.com. Now, whenever any user from the internet would try to browse uninets.com, okay, they would get the reference from .com and they would reach to this 123 domain server to get the IP of uninets.com. So this 123 domain server is going to reply with this IP, and once the user get this IP, he would be able to access UniNets.com. So this is what is the difference between on-premises DNS and your cloud-based DNS, any third-party provider DNS. Okay, when you put on-premises, so all the request for DNS query is going to resolve by your on-premises server. But when you put any cloud-based, so the query would go to any cloud-based DNS server, and cloud-based DNS server is going to reply one of the IP. You're residing on the on-premises, so that request would go on-premises web server. And this time, this is really easy to manage. For example, if you just want to do any DNS entry, you would go on the portal. This is self-managed. You would try to put their entry, and then that is going to, this is the headache of this 123 domain, how this is replicating to the entire world. Okay, so you are just going to do entry over here. After the entry, your DNS would start resolving. So for a small organization do not host their DNS server for public user on their on-premises. They host there on the public DNS server on any third-party provider. Right. So I hope you got the difference between on-premises and any third-party hosting provider.
Okay.